Can you fall in love with someone you've never met, through their words alone? Before you answer, consider this. What if the most intimate way to know someone isn't through touch or sight, but through the rhythm of their thoughts, the cadence of their soul spilled onto paper? In a rain-soaked corner of Bristol, England, Lara Gray lives this question every day. At 33, she's mastered 5 languages but struggles with the simplest human connections. Her small apartment overlooks the harbor, where ships come and go, much like the characters in the books she translates, arriving in her life only to depart once the final page is turned. Translation isn't just about words, Lara often tells her university students, her voice soft but certain. It's about finding the space between languages where meaning lives. What she doesn't tell them is how she sometimes traces her fingers over particularly beautiful passages, as if she might absorb the author's intent through her fingertips. Or how she occasionally whispers dialogue aloud in empty rooms, giving voice to characters who've become more real to her than most people. It arrives on a Tuesday, an unassuming package containing manuscript pages bound in simple black. Le Silence de la Terre, by Mathieu Leroy. The latest assignment from her publisher. Priority Project, reads the attached note. Author is particular about translation. Previous translator quit mid-project. Lara's fingers hover over the first page. Something about the weight of the paper, the density of the text, makes her hesitate. She's translated dozens of novels before, romance, mystery, literary fiction, but something feels different about this one. She doesn't know that across the channel in Lyon, the author sits in a sparsely furnished apartment, staring at a phone that hasn't rung in days. She doesn't know he's a man who writes like he's excavating his own heart, word by painful word. She doesn't know he's already decided no translator could possibly understand what he's trying to say. She doesn't know that when she opens this manuscript, she'll begin a conversation that will change both their lives. Lara makes her first cup of tea, settles into her reading chair, and opens to page 1. The first line reads, "Some silences are so loud, they drown out everything else." She inhales sharply. Something in those words reaches past her professional detachment and touches a place she's kept carefully guarded. A place where her own silences live. She reaches for her red pen, the one she uses for notes and questions, not knowing that this simple act will be the first thread in a tapestry of connection that neither she nor the mysterious Mathieu Leroy could possibly anticipate. Have you ever felt connected to someone through their writing alone? That moment when words on a page seem to reach directly into your soul? Share your experience in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. Before we begin, this is love from my heart to you. Or maybe, just a small love letter to say thank you. Once upon a time, this channel fell in love. Not with fairy tales, but with the people who believe in them. The ones who cry during the quiet parts. Who pause to feel a heartbeat between the lines. Who still believe that love, even complicated, flawed, impossible love, can be real. Love Enchanted was created for you. The romantic. The hopeful. The heart that's been broken and still dares to open again. So if you're here, you're not just watching a story. You're part of one. Stay with us, for stories that ache, heal, and remind us why love is always worth the risk. Lara's apartment sits on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian in Clifton, Bristol. From the outside, it's unremarkable, weathered brick, blue door, window boxes with herbs that struggle against England's persistent drizzle. Inside, it's a different world entirely. Books dominate every surface, stacked on coffee tables, lined on custom shelves, piled beside her bed. They're arranged not by author or genre, but by language. French novels near the window where morning light falls, Russian classics by the fireplace, Japanese poetry collections on floating shelves above her desk. The apartment isn't large, but it contains multitudes. "Home is where your books are," reads a hand-painted sign above her kitchen doorway, a gift from her mother before she stopped trying to understand her daughter's solitary life. Lara moves through her morning ritual with practiced precision. Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk. 2 pieces of toast with orange marmalade. The radio tuned to BBC 4 for the morning poetry reading. Her fingers absently trace the worn edges of her father's old leather notebook as she listens, a habit she's unaware of until she catches herself doing it. "You're impossible to reach sometimes, Lara," Daniel had said during their final argument 3 years ago. He stood in this very room, surrounded by her books, looking more frustrated than angry. "It's like you're half present in our relationship, while the rest of you is lost in translation." Daniel Harrington, literature professor, handsome in that disheveled academic way, and utterly incapable of understanding why Lara sometimes needed to disappear into words that weren't his. "You feel more for fictional characters than real people," he'd accused, his voice softening with something like pity. "I can't compete with the perfect men in your novels." "They're not perfect," she'd replied quietly. "They're just completely known. Every thought, every fear, every desire, it's all there on the page." The truth she couldn't articulate: real people were mysteries with missing pages. They disappeared without explanation. They left questions unanswered. On her desk sits the only photograph she has of her father, James Gray, war correspondent, captured midlife in some forgotten conflict zone. The image is creased from years of handling. He disappeared in Kosovo when Lara was 10. No body was ever found, no explanation ever given. Just a sudden, permanent absence that taught her how quickly a story could end without resolution. Her mother had retreated into grief. Lara had retreated into languages, first her father's journals in English, then books in French, Spanish, Italian, Russian. Each new language was a key that might unlock some hidden meaning, some explanation for why people leave and words remain. The manuscript of Loose Silence de la Terra sits open on her desk, the first 20 pages already marked with her neat handwriting. Lara checks her email, another message from her editor. Author requesting regular updates on translation progress. Unusual, I know, but he's insistent. Please send notes weekly. And Lara, he can be difficult. The last translator said his writing was too personal to translate. Whatever that means. Lara frowns. Authors rarely involved themselves in the translation process. Most were content to have their work rendered into another language without witnessing the messy middle, the questions, the approximations, the compromises. She turns back to page 21, where Mathieu Leroy's protagonist stands at the edge of a battlefield, searching for signs of life among ruins. The passage is devastating in its restraint, emotion contained in the spaces between words rather than the words themselves. Without thinking, Lara writes in the margin, "How do you translate absence?" The French manque carries weight that English missing doesn't. Like the difference between an empty room and a room someone has just left. She hesitates, then adds, "This passage feels lived rather than written." She doesn't intend to send this note, it's too personal, too revealing. But as she continues reading, something about Matthew's writing feels like a conversation already in progress. As if he's been waiting for someone to hear what he's not saying. Lara doesn't know that in Lion, Mathieu Leroy is about to receive her first set of translation notes. She doesn't know that her margin comment will cause him to spill coffee across his desk. She doesn't know that for the first time in years, someone is about to truly see him. And she has no way of knowing that the story she's translating is far more autobiographical than fiction. In Lion's old quarter, where medieval buildings lean against each other like old friends sharing secrets, Mathieu Leroy lives in deliberate isolation. His third-floor apartment overlooks the Saône River, though he rarely opens the heavy curtains to appreciate the view. Light is something he rations carefully these days. At 38, Mathieu moves with the cautious economy of someone much older. A slight limp from an old injury. A habit of pausing before entering rooms. Small behaviors that betray a man accustomed to danger, a man who still, sometimes, expects it. His apartment is spartanly furnished but for two exceptions, books and photographs. The books are arranged with military precision, reference texts, historical accounts, novels in multiple languages. The photographs are another matter entirely. Chaotic, overlapping, pinned to a massive cork board that dominates one wall. Images from war zones across 3 continents. Evidence of a life lived in the worst places at the worst possible moments. Mathieu hasn't taken a photograph in 5 years. Matthew's phone rings, then voicemail beep. Matthew, it's Claire from Lumiere Press. The translator has started work on Le Silence. She's good, one of the best. I forwarded her first set of notes as requested, though I still think this level of involvement is unnecessary. Call me back. Please. He doesn't call back. Instead, he opens his laptop and stares at the email containing the translator's notes. His finger hovers over the delete button, a reflex developed over years of avoiding engagement. But something stops him. A single comment highlighted by his publisher. This passage feels lived rather than written. Flashback. The explosion had thrown him 20 feet. When he regained consciousness, the world was muffled, sound arriving as if through water. Blood from his cameraman pooled beneath his cheek where he lay on the ground. The notebook in his breast pocket had stopped a piece of shrapnel from reaching his heart. Later, in a field hospital, a doctor had asked his name 3 times before he could answer. Not because he couldn't remember, but because speaking felt like betrayal. Words seemed obscene in the face of what he'd witnessed. For 6 months after returning to France, Mathieu didn't speak at all. When he finally did, it was to dictate his resignation from the news agency. Then he began to write, not journalism, but fiction that wasn't fiction at all. Stories that contained truths too raw for reportage. His publisher hadn't understood his reluctance to have Le Silence de la Terre translated. It's your breakthrough work, Mathieu, Claire had insisted. The English language market will make your career. How could he explain that the book wasn't just words on a page? That each sentence contained precise emotional calibrations? That translation felt like handing his still-beating heart to a stranger with a knife? Mathieu opens the translator's file. Lara Gray. The name means nothing to him, but her notes, precise, insightful, almost uncomfortably perceptive, suggest she's not approaching his work as mere text to be converted. Her question about translating absence stops him cold. How do you translate absence? The French manque carries weight that English missing doesn't. Like the difference between an empty room and a room someone has just left. His coffee grows cold as he reads her notes again. And again. She's seeing things in his writing that he thought were invisible. Currents beneath the surface that he'd assumed only he could feel. Against his better judgment, Mathieu begins to type a response. The protagonist doesn't search for signs of life. He searches for evidence that life was ever there at all. There's a difference. He pauses, then adds. Your note about manque versus missing, yes. Exactly this. Perhaps use absence instead? It carries the weight of something taken, not merely gone. He sends the email before he can reconsider, then immediately regrets it. Engaging with translators leads to questions. Questions lead to explanations. Explanations lead to exposure. From his desk drawer, Mathieu removes a worn press badge. The photo shows a younger man with clear eyes and an easy smile, someone unrecognizable now. Below the photo, a name, Mathieu Leroy, Associated Press. Below that, an emergency contact, James Gray, Reuters. He returns the badge to the drawer and closes it firmly. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed. What Mathieu doesn't yet realize is that the translator in Bristol has already begun to see the specters haunting his prose. What he can't know is that she recognizes them because they haunt her too. 3 days into translating Le Silence de la Terre, Lara finds herself working at unusual hours. She wakes at 4 a.m., drawn to her desk like someone answering a call. The manuscript exerts a gravity she hasn't experienced before, each page pulling her deeper into its world. By dawn, she's surrounded by reference books, tea mugs, and pages covered in notes. This isn't her usual methodical process. This is something else entirely. On page 47, a passage stops her completely. Les morts ne violent pas être rappels. Us violent seulement être témoins. She translates it literally first. The dead do not want to be remembered. They only want to be witnessed. But something about it feels wrong, not linguistically, but emotionally. The words are simple, but their meaning ripples outward like a stone dropped in still water. Lara writes in the margin, "This line seems contradictory. To witness is a form of remembering, isn't it? Or is the distinction that remembering is passive while witnessing requires action? The English doesn't capture the weight of témoins. It's more than just seeing. It's bearing testimony." She adds, almost as an afterthought, "This sentence made me stop breathing for a moment." When Matthew's response arrives the next morning, Lara nearly spills her tea. Authors rarely respond to translation queries directly. Usually their editors act as intermediaries. Yet here is a message from M. Leroy at lumiere-editions.fr. To witness is not to remember. Memory preserves. Testimony acknowledges. The dead don't want preservation, it's too close to taxidermy. They want acknowledgement of what happened to them, what was done to them. The English word witness will suffice if you emphasize its legal connotation rather than its observational one. No greeting. No sign-off. Just the response, direct and unadorned. Lara reads it 3 times, feeling a strange intimacy in his precision. This isn't an author protecting his prose, this is someone trying desperately to be understood. She replies before she can overthink it. "Thank you for the clarification. I understand the distinction now." There's a similar challenge with the phrase on page 53, "Le poids de choses non dites." Literally, the weight of things unsaid, but in English, this lacks the physical quality of poids. "I'm considering the burden of things unsaid, instead. Would this preserve your intention?" Matthew's response comes within the hour. Burden suggests something one wishes to put down. These unsaid things are carried willingly, even necessarily. Perhaps the ballast of things unsaid? That which keeps us from floating away entirely. Lara feels a flutter of something unexpected, the thrill of precision, of finding exactly the right word. But beneath that professional satisfaction lies something more personal. The sense that she's conversing not just with an author, but with someone who understands the weight words carry. Their exchanges continue throughout the week, specific at first, then gradually expanding. By Friday, they're discussing not just word choices but the emotional architecture of entire scenes. Lara, the scene where Jean-Paul returns to his childhood home, the description focuses entirely on what's missing rather than what remains. Is this intentional disorientation meant to reflect his psychological state? Matthew, yes. Absence defines presence. What's your approach to translating the paragraph about the empty bookshelf? Those specific dimensions matter. Lara, I preserved the measurements exactly. Some things shouldn't be converted. On page 87, she encounters a scene that stops her completely. The protagonist discovering his father's press credentials among rubble after a bombing. The description is sparse but devastating. The laminated card remained intact while flesh had not. This small immortality seemed both miracle and mockery. Without thinking, Lara writes in the margin, "My father's press badge is the only thing of his that survived Kosovo. I still don't know if that's a comfort or a cruelty." She immediately regrets the confession. It's unprofessional, too personal. But before she can delete it from her notes, exhaustion overtakes her. She falls asleep at her desk, the manuscript pages cushioning her cheek. When she wakes, she realizes with horror that her computer has auto-sent the day's translation notes, including her personal comment, to Matthew. For 3 days, there is silence. No responses to her professional queries. No acknowledgement of her personal revelation. Lara continues translating, but the work feels hollow now, contaminated by her lapse in judgment. On the 4th day, an email arrives. Not from Matthew's professional account, but from a personal address, m.l.solitude@gmail.com. The message contains only one line. My father disappeared in Sarajevo in 1995. His press badge was returned to me. Reuters. I keep it in my desk drawer and sometimes hold it like a talisman. I understand the comfort and the cruelty. Lara's hands tremble as she reads the message again. This isn't an author speaking to his translator anymore. This is one orphan child speaking to another across time and distance and language. She replies with equal simplicity, "I've never told anyone that before." His response comes within minutes. "Neither have I." In Bristol, Lara touches her computer screen as if she might feel the person behind the words. In Lion, Matthew stares at his sent message, equally stunned by his own disclosure. Neither realizes yet that they've begun a conversation that exists in a space beyond language, where translation becomes not just a professional exercise but an act of mutual recognition. Would you have the courage to reach out to someone who moved you through their art? To reveal yourself to a stranger whose words somehow found the hidden chambers of your heart? Like this video if you would take that risk, and tell us in the comments about a time when someone's creative work spoke directly to your soul. The translation of Le Silence de la Terre progresses, but something else grows alongside it. A correspondence that has begun to occupy the margins of Lara's professional life, then spill beyond them entirely. Their exchanges develop a rhythm. Professional notes during working hours, sent through official channels. Personal messages in the evening, from their private email accounts. Two parallel conversations, one about a book, one about everything else. From m.l.solitude@gmail.com. Subject, Chapter 8 Questions. You asked why Jean-Paul burns the photograph rather than the letter. Consider this, words can be misinterpreted, but images claim to show truth. Which is more dangerous? The thing that admits its subjectivity, or the thing that pretends to be objective? Lara finds herself smiling at his philosophical tangents. She types her response. Photographs lie by what they frame out. Words lie by what they frame in. Both are dangerous in different ways. I trust neither entirely, which might explain my career choice. Translators live in the space between what's said and what's meant. She hesitates, then adds, "Do you think that's why we both gravitated toward language after losing our fathers? Words can be pinned down in a way people can't." Their exchanges deepen. They discuss books they've both read, often discovering they've marked the same passages. They debate the untranslatable, those words that exist in one language but have no direct equivalent in another. Matthew sends her the Portuguese word, saudade, a melancholic longing for something absent. Lara counters with the Welsh hiraeth, homesickness for a place that no longer exists. "We're collecting words for our shared condition," he writes. "Perhaps we're trying to name something that exists between languages," she replies. By the third week, Lara finds herself checking for his messages before she even gets out of bed. Her phone is the first thing she reaches for, her heart quickening when she sees his name in her inbox. The translation work, normally her primary focus, has become the framework supporting something else entirely. She still approaches the text with professional rigor, but now she lingers over passages, wondering what Matthew was feeling when he wrote them, imagining his hands on the keyboard. "This is ridiculous," she tells her reflection as she brushes her teeth. "You don't even know what he looks like." But that's not entirely true. She knows his mind, its patterns, its preoccupations, its unexpected moments of humor amid darkness. She knows how he constructs sentences when he's being careful and how they unravel when emotion overtakes precision. She knows him in ways she's never known anyone else. "The publisher is thrilled with your progress," her editor tells her. "They say the author has never been this engaged with a translation before. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What she's doing, Lara realizes, is falling in love with a voice, with a mind, with words that feel like hands reaching across darkness. From lara.gray@bristoltranslations.co.uk. Subject, Chapter 12, Technical Question. The scene where Jean-Paul finds the child's shoe in the rubble. You use the word bouleverse to describe his reaction. In English, this could be devastated, overwhelmed, shattered, or even turned upside down, literally. Each carries different weight. Which most closely matches your intention? His official response comes the next morning. Shattered is closest. The experience breaks something in him that cannot be repaired, only reassembled differently. But later that night, a different message arrives. From m.l.solitude@gmail.com. Subject: Bullaverse. I found a child's shoe in Grozny, 2002. Red canvas, impossibly small. I've never written about it directly until this novel. No one has ever asked me about that specific word choice before. How do you see so clearly through my language into what lies beneath it? Lara stares at the message, understanding the gift of trust she's just been given. She replies, "Perhaps because I'm looking for you in the spaces between words." Translation isn't just about language, it's about finding the person behind the text. She sends it before she can reconsider, then immediately panics. Has she revealed too much? Crossed a professional boundary? But his response, when it comes, quiets her fears. No one has ever looked for me there before. I'm not sure I wanted to be found until now. As April turns to May, their correspondence intensifies. They exchange messages daily, sometimes hourly. They begin to share fragments of their lives beyond the manuscript. Lara describes the harbor view from her window. Mathieu sends a photo of the morning light on the Saône River, though never of himself. They discover shared tastes in music, similar political views, the same dark humor that people around them often misinterpret as cynicism. "Do you ever feel like you're translating yourself for others?" he asks one night. "Simplifying your thoughts to make them palatable?" "Constantly," she replies. "But not with you." As the translation nears its midpoint, Lara realizes something has shifted. She's no longer just translating a novel. She's engaged in a conversation across languages, across countries, across the boundaries between professional and personal. She finds herself lingering over his protagonist's inner thoughts, wondering how much of Mathieu lives in those passages. She catches herself reading his emails multiple times, analyzing his word choices as carefully as she does his manuscript. One night, she dreams of a man whose face she cannot see, speaking words she understands perfectly despite not knowing what language he's speaking. She wakes with a start, her heart racing, and checks her phone. A new message from Mathieu waits in her inbox. "I dreamt of translation last night. Of words floating between languages, finding their proper homes. You were there, though I couldn't see your face. Is that strange to admit?" The coincidence unsettles her. She types and deletes 3 different responses before settling on honesty. "Not strange. I had a similar dream. Perhaps we're haunting each other's subconscious the way our fathers haunt our waking hours." His response comes quickly. There's a word in Arabic, ya'abarni. It means, "you bury me." It's the hope that you'll die before someone you love deeply, because living without them would be unbearable. I always thought it was the most romantic word in any language. Now I'm not so sure. Now I think the most romantic word might be translate. To carry across, to bear from one shore to another. Lara touches her screen, tracing his words with her fingertip. The intimacy of the exchange takes her breath away. She's falling in love with someone she's never seen, whose voice she's never heard, whose physical presence remains a complete mystery to her. All she knows is his mind, his heart, his words. And somehow, it feels like the most real connection she's ever experienced. June arrives with relentless rain in Bristol. Lara works late into the night, the translation now 3/4 complete. Le Silence de la Terre has become more than a project, it's become a vessel carrying her towards something she can't yet name. Tonight, she faces the novel's most difficult chapter, where Jean-Paul discovers documents suggesting his father may have been complicit in the very atrocities he was reporting on. The passage is brutal in its restraint. The truth arrives not as revelation, but as confirmation. What we most fear is often what we've always known. Lara's translation stalls. The words feel leaden, impossible to lift from one language to another. After 3 attempts, she closes her laptop and reaches instead for her father's notebook, the one possession of his that returned from Kosovo when he did not. She rarely reads it anymore. The early pages contain standard reporter's observations, facts, figures, interview notes. But the later entries grow increasingly personal, increasingly troubled. Her father had been investigating arms trafficking, following a trail that led from Western governments to war zones. His final entry, dated 3 days before his disappearance. Some stories are too dangerous to tell. Some silences protect more than they conceal. Without planning to, Lara takes a photograph of this page and attaches it to an email to Mathieu. I've never shown this to anyone. My father's last written words before Kosovo. I'm struggling with your chapter about Jean-Paul's discovery. It feels too close to questions I've never had the courage to ask about my own father. Was he simply a victim, or was there something more complicated in his disappearance? She sends it impulsively, then immediately regrets the disclosure. It's nearly midnight, he's probably asleep. She should focus on the translation, maintain professional boundaries, stop projecting her personal history onto his fiction. His response arrives within minutes. Lara, I need to tell you something. Can we speak directly? Not through email. Her heart pounds as she stares at the message. In 2 months of increasingly intimate correspondence, they've never spoken by phone or video. Their relationship has existed entirely in text, a fact that has felt both limiting and strangely appropriate. She types her phone number with trembling fingers. When it rings moments later, she almost doesn't answer. Some irrational part of her fears that hearing his voice will break the spell, that the Mathieu who exists in her imagination will be replaced by a real person who cannot possibly match what she's created. Hello. Her voice sounds strange to her own ears. A pause, then. Lara. Just her name, spoken in a voice lower than she expected, with a French accent less pronounced than she imagined. I've been dishonest with you. Not intentionally, but through omission. The bottom drops out of her stomach. What do you mean? Your father. James Gray from Reuters. His voice catches. I knew him. The world tilts sideways. Lara grips the edge of her desk. That's not possible, she whispers. Sarajevo, 1994. I was a junior correspondent with Associated Press. Your father took me under his wing, showed me how to navigate checkpoints, which officials could be trusted. He was kind to me when few others were. Lara can't speak, can't breathe. The ghost that has haunted her entire adult life suddenly has a new dimension, a connection to the man whose words have become so important to her. When he was assigned to Kosovo, we lost touch, Mathieu continues. I was sent to Chechnya. When I heard about his disappearance, I should have reached out to his family, to you. But I was young, selfish, overwhelmed by my own trauma. Why are you telling me this now? Lara finally manages. Your father's notebook. That last entry. His voice grows tight. Lara, he was investigating the same arms dealers I later tracked in Grozny. Western weapons flowing east through humanitarian aid channels. Powerful people implicated. Dangerous people. The implications crash over her in waves. Her father wasn't simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was targeted. Silenced. The novel, she whispers. Jean-Paul's father. Is based partly on James. Yes. Mathieu's admission hangs in the air between them. I didn't know you were his daughter when you were assigned as my translator. I didn't make the connection until you mentioned Kosovo. Even then, I wasn't certain until tonight, until I saw his handwriting. Lara's mind reels, trying to process this collision of her past and present. The novel she's been translating contains echoes of her own history, filtered through Mathieu's imagination, transformed by fiction, but rooted in a shared reality she never suspected. I should have told you sooner, he says into her silence. But I feared losing, whatever this is between us. All this time, Lara says finally, I've been translating a story that's partly my own, without knowing it. Perhaps that's why your translation cuts so deep, Mathieu replies softly. You've been finding your way back to your father through my words. The realization lands with the force of truth. Her connection to Mathieu's writing wasn't just literary appreciation or romantic projection, it was recognition. Some part of her had sensed her own history woven into his fiction. The scene with the press badge, she says. The red shoe in Grozny. the investigation that goes nowhere. You weren't just writing fiction. No, he admits. I was trying to make sense of things I couldn't face directly. Writing was the only way I could look at the truth without being blinded by it. They fall silent, both absorbing the magnitude of what's been revealed. Their connection, already unusual, has taken on new dimensions, layers of shared history neither could have imagined. I don't know what to say, Lara finally whispers. Neither do I, Mathieu responds. This goes beyond anything I could have anticipated when I began writing to you. Beyond literature, beyond translation. Beyond words, she agrees. Another silence, but this one feels different, charged with possibility rather than shock. Lara, Mathieu says finally, his voice gentle but certain. I think we need to meet. In that moment, Lara understands that their relationship has crossed a threshold. What began as professional correspondence, evolved into intellectual connection, and blossomed into emotional intimacy has now become something else entirely. A shared destiny, a narrative larger than either of them alone could write. Yes, she says simply. I think we do. The revelation about her father changes everything and nothing. Lara still has a manuscript to complete. Deadlines don't bend for emotional earthquakes. But as she works through the final chapters of Le Silence de la Terre, something shifts in her approach. The translation becomes more personal, more urgent, as if by perfectly rendering Mathieu's words, she might unlock some final truth about her father's fate. They've agreed to meet when the translation is complete. 2 weeks. 14 days that stretch like years. Late at night, after 8 hours of translation work, Lara opens a new email. Not to Mathieu's professional account or even his personal one, but to herself, a draft she has no intention of sending. I don't know how to say this without sounding like someone who has lost perspective. Perhaps I have. I'm a translator. I'm supposed to remain invisible, to serve as a clear window between languages. Instead, I've become a prism, bending everything through my own feelings. I think I'm in love with you. Not just with your writing or your mind, but with you, a person I've never seen, whose face I wouldn't recognize on a street. Is that even possible? Or am I in love with a creation of my own imagination, built from fragments of text and voice? What happens when we meet and you're not the person I've constructed from your words? What happens when I'm not the woman you think you know through my translations? I'm afraid of losing something precious before it fully exists. She saves the draft, closes her laptop, and stares out at the rain-slicked streets of Bristol. Somewhere across the channel, Mathieu is probably working too. Their mutual insomnia has become a joke between them. She wonders what his hands look like as they move across the keyboard. Whether he speaks aloud as he writes, testing the sound of sentences. Whether he's as afraid as she is. A message arrives at 2:17 a.m. I can't sleep. I've attached something for you. Not part of the novel. Something new. For your eyes only. The attachment is titled simply, Translation. It's a short story, barely 5 pages. No title, no author attribution. It begins. There once was a man who believed language was a cage. Each word a bar, each sentence a boundary. He wrote to escape, not knowing he was building a more elaborate prison with every page. Until a woman began to read his words in one language and transform them into another. With each translation, a bar disappeared. With each question she asked, the cage grew larger. With each margin note, he saw a way out. But freedom terrified him. What if, once released from the cage of his own creation, he disappointed her? What if his true self was less compelling than his written self? What if the connection they'd forged through words couldn't survive their physical presence? Lara's breath catches. The story continues, following the man as he writes a special manuscript just for the translator, a confession disguised as fiction. As she reads, she recognizes elements of their own correspondence woven into the narrative, transformed but unmistakable. The story ends with the man waiting in a cafe, watching the door, not knowing if the translator will appear or if their connection will remain forever in the realm of words. The final line reads, He understood then that some translations cannot be completed on the page. Some require the full vocabulary of presence. Lara reads the story 3 times, tears blurring her vision. It's the most intimate thing she's ever received, more revealing than any conventional declaration of love could be. In these pages, Mathieu has exposed his own fears, his own doubts, his own hope. She begins to type a response, then stops. No words seem adequate. Instead, she opens the translation file and works through the night, pouring everything she feels into the rendering of his novel's final chapters. Dawn finds her exhausted but clear-headed. She sends the completed translation to her editor with a brief note, final draft attached. "This is my best work." Then she opens a new email to Mathieu. "I received your story. I've read it many times. You've captured exactly what I've been afraid to say, that we've created each other through words, and reality might not match our creations. But here's what I believe: words aren't cages. They're bridges. Imperfect ones, yes. Sometimes rickety, sometimes beautiful. But they've carried us this far. I'm terrified too. What if the connection we feel exists only in language? What if, face to face, we become strangers again? But I keep thinking about translation itself, the act of carrying meaning from one shore to another. Never perfect, always an approximation, but necessary. Worth the attempt. I've finished the translation. Our professional relationship is complete. Whatever happens next is entirely new territory." She sends it before she can reconsider, then closes her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of everything unsaid between them. When her phone rings, she answers immediately. "Lara." His voice sounds different, strained, uncertain. "I've been sitting here trying to write you an email for hours. Nothing seemed right." "I know the feeling," she says softly. "I'm afraid," he admits. "Not of meeting you, but of disappointing you. My words on the page, they're carefully chosen, edited, controlled. The real me is messier, less eloquent, damaged in ways that don't translate well to the page." "You think I don't know that?" she asks. "Mathieu, I've translated your novel. I've seen the darkness you carry. I've felt it in every sentence." "That's different," he insists. "Fiction allows distance. Meeting face to face, there's nowhere to hide." Lara watches raindrops race down her window, merging and separating in unpredictable patterns. "Maybe we don't need to hide," she says finally. "Maybe that's the point." A long silence stretches between them. "What if," he begins, then stops. "What if you've fallen in love with my words, not me?" The question, so close to her own fears, makes her heart ache. "What if you've fallen in love with my interpretation of your words, not me?" she counters. They both fall silent, the parallel fears hanging in the air between Bristol and Lyon. "I don't know how to resolve this," Mathieu says finally. "Except by taking the risk. The risk of meeting. The risk of reality." Lara takes a deep breath. The publisher is hosting a launch event for the English translation in Paris. 2 weeks from now. "I'm expected to attend." "I know," he says. "They've asked me to make a rare public appearance. For the publicity." Another silence, heavy with implication. "Will you come?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he admits. "Part of me wants to preserve what we have, keep it perfect, untouched by reality. What if meeting ruins everything? What if it doesn't?" she challenges. "What if it's better? Is that possible?" He sounds genuinely uncertain. "I don't know," Lara answers honestly. "But I think it's worth finding out." The silence that follows feels like standing on a precipice. Neither willing to step back, neither quite ready to leap. 2 weeks, he says finally. Paris. Shakespeare and Company Bookshop. I'll try to be there. Not a promise. Not a certainty. Just a possibility. "I'll look for you," she replies. After they hang up, Lara stares at her reflection in the window. 4 months, she's lived inside Matthew's words, finding herself in his language. Now she faces the prospect of stepping outside that protected space into the unpredictable territory of physical reality. The thought terrifies and exhilarates her in equal measure. Do you believe two souls can recognize each other through words alone? Can a connection formed through language survive the test of physical presence? Subscribe to hear more stories of unconventional love, and share in the comments your own experiences of connections that transcended ordinary boundaries. Paris in June shimmers with possibility. The Seine reflects golden evening light, plane trees rustle along the boulevards, and café conversations spill onto sunlit terraces. The city feels like a poem Lara once translated, beautiful in any language, but with subtle meanings that shift depending on who's reading. She stands before her hotel mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She's changed outfits 3 times already. Nothing feels right for meeting a man who knows her soul but not her face. This is ridiculous, she tells herself, settling on a simple blue dress that brings out her eyes. He might not even come, but she knows he will. Despite his uncertainty, despite his fears, Matthew will be there. She feels this truth in the same inexplicable way she sometimes knows exactly which English word best captures a French emotion. In her bag, she carries a finished copy of The Silence of the Earth, the English edition of Matthew's novel, her translation. The publisher had sent it by courier yesterday, a day before the official launch. Seeing her name beneath his on the cover had made the connection between them suddenly, startlingly tangible. She opens it now to the dedication page, which reads simply, "For those who carry silence across borders." When she'd first translated this line, she'd assumed it referred to refugees, to survivors of war. Now she wonders if he'd been thinking of translators. Of her. Shakespeare and Company sits on the left bank facing Notre Dame, its weathered green facade as much a Paris landmark as the Grand Cathedral across the water. Tonight, the famous bookshop is hosting the launch of Mathieu Leroy's first English translation, an unusual honor for a contemporary French novelist. Lara arrives early, slipping through the crowded shop to the small courtyard in back where the reading will take place. White chairs are arranged in neat rows. A podium stands ready. Booksellers arrange copies of The Silence of the Earth on a display table. She chooses a seat near the back, heart pounding so loudly she's certain others must hear it. The courtyard fills gradually with literary Paris, editors, critics, fellow translators. Several people nod to her in recognition. Her editor approaches, beaming. There she is, the woman who captured Mathieu Leroy's voice so perfectly. Everyone's talking about the translation, Lara. It's extraordinary. Thank you, she manages. Is the author here? Her editor looks around. Not yet. You know his reputation. Reclusive to the point of invisibility. But he promised to come tonight. For you, I think. Lara feels heat rise to her cheeks. For the book, she corrects. Her editor gives her a knowing look. The publisher mentioned you two developed quite the correspondence during the translation process. Apparently, he's never been so involved before. Before Lara can respond, the bookshop owner approaches the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special evening celebrating the English publication of The Silence of the Earth by Mathieu Leroy, translated by Lara Gray. We're honored to have Ms. Gray with us tonight to read from her translation. And we're especially pleased that Mr. Leroy has agreed to make a rare public appearance to mark this occasion. Lara's hands tighten around her copy of the book. She scans the courtyard, searching for anyone who might be Matthew, but sees no one who matches the vague image she's constructed in her mind. First, let's welcome Lara Gray to share her experience of translating this remarkable work. Walking to the podium feels like moving through water. Lara places her book down, adjusts the microphone, and looks out at the sea of expectant faces. Translation, she begins, her voice steadier than she feels, is an act of intimate listening. To translate well, you must hear not just what the words say, but what they mean. Not just the story being told, but the person telling it. As she speaks about the novel, about the challenges of carrying its emotional weight into another language, her eyes continue to search the crowd. Where is he? There's a moment in the novel where the protagonist says, "Some silences are so loud, they drown out everything else." As a translator, my job was to make those silences audible in English, to preserve the spaces between words where the true meaning often lives. A latecomer slips in quietly. Tall, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples. He stands against the wall rather than taking a seat, partially hidden in shadow. Something about his stillness, his careful attention, makes Lara's voice falter momentarily. She continues, but her awareness of him remains acute, like a magnetic pull she can't ignore. When she finishes speaking and returns to her seat amid applause, she finds herself unable to look in his direction, afraid of what she might feel if their eyes meet. The bookshop owner returns to the podium. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce an author who rarely makes public appearances. Please welcome Mathieu Leroy. The man by the wall steps forward into the light. Lara's breath catches. He moves with the careful economy she'd imagined from his writing. Deliberate, measured, as if conserving energy for what matters most. His face is more lined than she expected, his eyes deeper set, but there's something familiar in his expression, a particular intensity she recognizes from his prose. As he reaches the podium, his gaze sweeps the audience before settling, with unmistakable recognition, on her. No introduction needed. No confirmation required. In that moment of silent acknowledgement, something passes between them that transcends their months of written correspondence. He knows her. She knows him. "Thank you for coming," he begins, his accented English precise but warm. "I am not comfortable with public speaking, as my publisher will attest. But tonight is important for reasons beyond literature." He opens his copy of the novel, the French edition, she notices. "I will read a short passage in French, and then Ms. Gray's English translation will be read. This seems appropriate, as this novel now exists in 2 languages, 2 voices, joined in a conversation that has become significant to me." His eyes find hers again, briefly, before returning to the page. As he reads, his voice transforms, becoming richer, more confident. The words flow like music, and even those in the audience who don't understand French seem captivated by the rhythm and emotion of his delivery. When he finishes, he looks up. "And now, the translation. Lara, would you join me?" Lara moves to the podium as if in a dream. Standing beside Mathieu, close enough to notice the faint scent of cedar and coffee, to see a small scar above his right eyebrow, she opens her book to the marked page. As she reads her translation of the passage he just shared, their voices seem to echo each other across the gulf of language. Different words, same meaning. Different sounds, same emotion. When she finishes, the courtyard remains silent for a moment before erupting in applause. They stand together, translator and author, connected by words and something far beyond them. The formal event transitions to a reception. Lara and Mathieu sign books, accept congratulations, answer questions about their collaboration. They move in separate orbits around the courtyard, always aware of each other's location, exchanging glances across the crowded space. Finally, as the crowd thins, he approaches her corner of the courtyard, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "I thought we might need this," he says, offering her one. Up close, the reality of him is overwhelming, the physical presence that had been missing from their connection until now. His hands, she notices, are exactly as she'd imagined them, strong, with long fingers marked by a writer's callus. "You came," she says simply. "Did you doubt I would?" "Yes," she admits. "Until the moment I saw you." He smiles, a small, private expression that transforms his serious face. "I almost didn't. I sat in a cafe across the street for an hour, trying to find the courage." "What changed your mind?" "I realized something," he says, his eyes holding hers. "All these months, I've been afraid that reality couldn't match what we've built through words. But that fear itself was based on a false premise. Which was that words aren't real. That what we've shared exists only in language." He takes a careful breath. But language is how humans make meaning. It's how we build bridges between isolated minds. What could be more real than that? They find themselves walking along the river as twilight deepens into night. Notre Dame glows golden against the darkening sky. Their conversation flows easily now, no longer constrained by the formality of emails or the limitations of translation notes. "When did you know," she asks, "that this was more than a professional collaboration?" He considers this. "There was a note you left on page 214, about the line, 'He knew the dead didn't want to be remembered, only witnessed.' You wrote that it made you stop breathing for a moment." He looks at her. "That's when I realized you weren't just translating my words. You were feeling them." Lara smiles, remembering. "For me, it was when you explained the difference between burden and ballast for le poids de choses non dites." No one had ever been so precise about emotional weight before. They stop walking, leaning against the stone wall overlooking the Seine. Paris glitters around them, but they see only each other. "And now?" she asks softly. "Now that we've met? Now that we're real to each other?" Mathieu takes her hand, a gesture at once tentative and certain. "Now we begin a new translation. Not from French to English, but from words to life." Music swells with emotion. As he leans toward her, Lara closes her eyes. Their first kiss feels like the perfect word after a long search, exactly right, immediately recognizable, impossible to improve upon. When they part, she sees in his eyes the same wonder she feels, that something begun in language has transformed into something beyond it. That their connection, far from diminishing in person, has only deepened with physical presence. "I was afraid you wouldn't recognize me," she confesses. "I would know you in any language," he replies. "In any form." Some translations require no words at all. As they walk hand in hand along the Seine, their story, begun in separate languages, continued through translation, and now emerging into shared reality, feels both complete and just beginning. In the quiet hours before dawn, Lara sits at the small desk in her Paris hotel room, watching the city's lights shimmer through the window. Beside her, Mathieu sleeps peacefully, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen during their waking hours together. She opens her laptop and begins to write, not a translation this time, but her own words. We live in an age obsessed with physical presence. We swipe right on attractive faces, measure chemistry and heartbeats, and trust what we can touch more than what we can only feel. But what if our deepest connections begin elsewhere? In the spaces between thoughts, in the resonance of shared understanding. For months, I knew a man only through his words. I fell in love with his mind before I ever saw his face. I recognized his soul before I heard his voice. Was this connection less real because it lacked physical dimension? Or was it more authentic precisely because it formed in that pure space where thoughts meet without the distractions of the physical world? Perhaps true intimacy isn't about proximity at all. Perhaps it's about recognition, that moment when one soul says to another, "I see you. I understand. You are not alone in how you experience the world." He reads over her shoulder, his hand gently resting on her back. "You're writing," he observes softly. "Something I've been thinking about," she explains. "About us. About how we found each other." "May I?" he asks, gesturing to the laptop. She nods, and he continues reading where she left off. "We both carried wounds that had shaped our lives, fathers lost to the same conflict, questions that haunted us across decades. What began as shared pain became a foundation for healing. Not because we could answer each other's questions or fill each other's voids, but because we could witness each other's grief without looking away. There is power in being truly seen, not just the carefully curated self we present to the world, but the messy, complicated truth beneath." Words became the bridge that carried us to each other, revealing what might have remained hidden in the distractions of ordinary meeting. Mathieu sits beside her, their shoulders touching. "It's beautiful," he says. "And true. I keep thinking about courage," Lara continues, both speaking and typing now. Not the dramatic kind celebrated in stories, but the quiet bravery of vulnerability. The courage to let someone see your thoughts before they see your face. The courage to move from the safety of imagination to the risk of reality. The courage to translate feeling into action, Mathieu adds. She smiles at the perfect phrase. Exactly. To translate feeling into action. Together, they watch the first light of dawn touch the Paris rooftops. The city transforms gradually from a landscape of shadows and artificial lights to one of subtle colors and natural illumination. I've spent my career moving between languages, Lara says softly. Finding equivalences, building bridges of understanding. But I never expected to find someone who could read the original text of my heart and understand it without translation. Mathieu takes her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Perhaps that's what love is, the one language that requires no translation. The recognition that transcends words entirely. As the new day brightens around them, they sit in comfortable silence. Two people who found each other first through language, then beyond it. Their story stands as testament to a truth often forgotten in our physical world, that souls connect not through proximity, but through recognition. That words can build bridges strong enough to carry hearts across any distance. That love, in its purest form, begins not with seeing, but with understanding. And that sometimes, the most profound connections form in the space between languages, where meaning transcends words and hearts speak directly to one another. 1 year later. The cottage sits on a cliff overlooking the Bristol Channel, halfway between Lara's city apartment and Mathieu's home in France. Whitewashed walls, blue shutters, a garden that tumbles toward the sea. It belongs to neither of them and both of them, a neutral territory where two languages and two lives intertwine. Inside, the small house speaks of their shared existence. Bookshelves line the walls, French novels beside English translations, sometimes the same title in multiple languages. Two desks face different windows, hers looking east toward the rising sun, his west toward the sunset. Between them, a shared space where manuscripts, notes, and coffee mugs commingle. Lara looks up from her latest translation project, a young Syrian poets collection, to find Mathieu watching her from his desk. "What?" she asks, smiling. "I was just thinking about the first note you ever left in my manuscript," he says. "About witnessing versus remembering." She nods, remembering. That feels like another lifetime. In some ways, it was. He gestures to the space between them. All this began with that question. Their life together has found its own rhythm. 3 weeks here at the cottage. 2 weeks apart, she in Bristol teaching her translation seminars, he in Lyon finishing his new novel. Then reunion, the distance making their connection not weaker but more intentional. As Lara makes tea, she glances at the framed photograph on the kitchen wall, her father and a young Mathieu in Sarajevo, arms around each other's shoulders, both laughing at some forgotten joke. They'd found it in Mathieu's old press archives, a moment preserved in time that connected their pasts long before they connected their futures. "I heard from the publisher today," Mathieu calls from his desk. "They want you to translate the new book." Lara returns with 2 steaming mugs. "Will that be strange? Translating your words now that I know the man behind them." He considers this. "I think it will be different. Not strange. You'll see things in the text that others wouldn't. But isn't that what made your first translation special?" She sits beside him, their shoulders touching. "I was translating you before I knew I was translating you. And now I translate with knowledge rather than intuition. Both have their place." They move to the small terrace overlooking the sea. The afternoon light turns the water to hammered gold. In the distance, ships move slowly along the horizon, coming from somewhere, going elsewhere. "I've been thinking about starting a new project," Lara says, watching the vessels. "A memoir about my father. About finding pieces of him through your words. About how translation became more than a profession for me." Mathieu takes her hand. "I think James would be proud of that. Of you. I couldn't have written it before you," she admits. "I needed your words to find my own." He smiles at the symmetry. And I needed your translation to understand what I was really writing. As twilight approaches, they remain on the terrace, between land and sea, between day and night, in that liminal space where transitions happen and meanings shift. Do you remember asking me if I thought it was possible for two souls to recognize each other through words alone? Matthew asks. I remember, she says. You said you didn't know, but you thought it was worth finding out. He turns to her, his expression soft with certainty. Now I know. Lara leans against him, feeling the solid reality of his presence. No longer words on a page or a voice through a phone, but a life intertwined with hers. Yet the miracle of their connection remains. They found each other first through language, through the careful translation of thought into word, word into feeling. Some stories don't end, she murmurs. They just change languages. As darkness falls, lights appear along the coast, small beacons guiding ships safely to harbor. Lara and Matthew watch them together, two people who navigated their own dark waters to find an unexpected shore. Two souls who discovered that the most profound translation of all is from solitude into connection. Two hearts that learned to speak the same language. Thank you for joining us for this journey of love and language. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Love Enchanted for more tales of extraordinary connection. Remember that love finds us in the most unexpected ways, sometimes through words that bridge the distances we thought couldn't be crossed.